The world was covered in white silence. Snow stretched as far as the eye could see, shining under a pale sky. In this frozen land, three small figures lay hidden beneath the snowdrift, almost forgotten by time. They were sisters, born together, bound together, yet separated from the warmth of their people. The cold wrapped around them like a cage, making each breath a struggle. They had not chosen their fate, but their lives seemed written in the endless snow. The sisters were different. From the moment of their birth, whispers followed them. They could not bring new life into the world, and for that reason, they were seen as less, as broken. But deep within their hearts, they were whole. They shared laughter, they shared tears, they shared every dream as one. Yet their difference made others turn away. The land was harsh, but the hearts around them were colder. Slowly they were left behind. Slowly the snow became their home. The frozen ground held them now. The cold pressed against their skin, quieting their voices, slowing their hearts. Still they clung to one another. They had only each other, and in that bond was their strength. The eldest closed her eyes and whispered a promise, even though no one else could hear. She said they would not be forgotten. She said the snow would not take them. Not yet. But her voice was faint, softer than the wind itself. Above them, the storm was restless. The sky carried clouds that swallowed the light, and the air cut across the wasteland with sharp edges. The land was empty, or so it seemed. No footsteps disturbed the silence. No fires glowed in the distance. The sisters were alone in every sense. Time moved slowly, as if the frozen world wished to keep them forever in that moment between life and silence. Far away, across the endless plains of snow, another figure moved. He was not one of their kind. His steps were heavy, his breath a cloud in the icy air. Wrapped in layers, carrying tools of survival, he was a traveler from another world. His ship had landed far from the place he expected, and now he searched for signs of life, for anything to remind him that he was not the only soul wandering this frozen land. The wind carried no answers, only whispers of emptiness. Yet as he walked, something drew him closer. His device, small and humming with light, blinked in his hand. It was built to find warmth where warmth was rare. The screen showed a weak signal, faint, almost gone. He frowned. Nothing should live here, not under this storm. But the signal pulsed again, as if calling him. Curiosity filled his steps, guiding him across the uneven snow until he reached a drift larger than the rest. He stopped. The snow here seemed different. Too still, too heavy. The air around him felt charged, as if the ground itself held a secret. He knelt, brushing the surface with his glove. The snow was deep but not endless. Something was beneath it. The signal grew stronger. His heart quickened. He leaned closer, listening. For a moment he thought he heard it, a faint sound softer than the storm, like a fragile breath fighting against the silence. He pulled back, unsure. Could life truly survive here? He had crossed many worlds, seen many forms of existence, but never had he felt the weight of choice so strongly. His mind argued that it was impossible. His heart whispered otherwise. The storm raged around him, but he remained still, staring at the snowdrift that hid the truth below. A decision lingered in the frozen air. Beneath the snow, the sisters stirred. Their bodies were weak, but their spirits had not yet let go. The youngest sister dreamed. In her dream, a light appeared above the snow, warm and golden. It stretched down, touching her face. She did not know its name, but she felt hope. Her lips moved, whispering a word in her own tongue, a word that meant wait. She believed that something or someone would come. Her sisters, though weary, held to her dream. The traveler rose to his feet and looked around. The storm made it hard to see, but something in his chest told him he had found more than frozen ground. His device blinked once more, steady and sure. He pressed his hand against the snow, and for a moment he thought he felt the faintest warmth pushing back against the cold. His breath caught. Life was here, fragile, hidden, but alive. The wind howled, urging him to move on, to leave the strange place behind, but he could not. His heart would not let him. Something deep inside him whispered that this was no accident. His path had led him here for a reason. The snow was not just snow, it was a veil. And behind that veil, 3 lives waited. He knelt again, his hands sinking into the frozen layers. He did not yet know their names, their faces, or their story. But he knew one truth. He could not turn away. The sisters were waiting, and destiny had brought him to their side. The storm grew louder, but within him a quiet strength rose. He would uncover the mystery hidden beneath the snow, no matter what lay ahead. The storm carried endless waves of white, pushing across the land as if it wished to erase every trace of life. Yet in the middle of this emptiness, one figure moved with steady steps. The human traveler pressed forward, his boots sinking into the soft snow. Each breath left clouds behind him, fading quickly in the cold. He was not sure how far he had walked since his landing. Time in this frozen world seemed strange, as if hours and days were one. But he walked on because something in his heart told him he was not alone. He carried with him a small device, built to find traces of energy or warmth. On most days, it showed nothing but silence. Today, however, the screen flickered with weak signals. The readings were faint, almost like a heartbeat far away. He frowned and slowed his pace. There should be nothing alive out here, not in this storm. Still, the device pulsed again, steady enough to catch his attention. He stopped and studied the snow around him. To his eyes, the land looked the same in every direction, but deep inside he felt a difference. He bent down, brushing his gloved hand across the frozen surface. The snow was heavier here, packed as though hiding something. He paused, listening. At first he heard only the endless howl of the wind, but then, through the silence, there was something softer, something fragile. It was not clear enough to call a sound, but his instincts told him it was real. He held his breath and waited. The world seemed to quiet for a moment, and in that stillness he knew there was life below. His heart raced, not from fear but from wonder. He had traveled across many worlds, met many strange forms, but never had he stumbled upon something like this. He stood there, unsure of what to do. Part of him said to move forward, to dig, to find what lay hidden. Another part whispered doubt. What if it was only the storm playing tricks? What if the signal was nothing more than ice shifting under the weight of the wind? Yet even as his thoughts clashed, his hands reached down again. His body seemed to know what his mind had not yet accepted. There was someone here. The snow shifted beneath his touch. He leaned closer, brushing layer after layer, careful and slow. A faint shape appeared, not of stone or ice, but something different. His breath caught. The surface beneath was smooth, almost soft, though chilled by the cold. His hand rested there for a moment, and through the glove he thought he felt the faintest warmth. It was enough to still his doubts. This was not ice. This was life. He worked carefully, pulling away more snow. Soon he uncovered what seemed like a small hand, delicate, resting in the frozen earth. His eyes widened in disbelief. This was no illusion. This was real. He looked around the empty wasteland as if expecting someone to appear and explain, but the storm gave no answers. He returned his gaze to the fragile figure. The hand twitched ever so slightly. A breath of relief escaped his lips. Whoever this was, they were alive. He continued, uncovering another shape close by, then another. There were 3 of them lying side by side as if the snow itself had embraced them. Their bodies were weak, their faces pale, but there was still life within them. He did not know who they were or why they had been hidden here, but it no longer mattered. What mattered was the simple truth that they were alive and he had found them. He quickly set down his pack and pulled out a small heating device, one he used for his own survival. He placed it near the sisters, letting the gentle warmth spread across their frozen skin. Slowly, faint breaths became clearer. Eyes fluttered open, soft and glowing, filled with confusion. The sisters looked at him, unsure of what they were seeing. Their world had been cold and silent, and now a stranger stood before them. The human raised his hands gently, showing he meant no harm. His voice was calm, though the words were strange to their ears. "It's all right," he whispered, not knowing if they could understand. His tone carried kindness, and kindness needed no translation. He reached into his pack again, pulling out water and small food rations. Carefully, he offered them. At first, the sisters hesitated, unsure if this was another trick of the cold. But the warmth from the heater touched their skin, and slowly, trust began to grow. They took the water, their hands trembling. The human helped them drink, guiding them with patience. The snowstorm roared outside, but here, inside this small circle of care, there was peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, the sisters were not alone. They did not understand his words, but they understood his actions. He had pulled them out of silence and given them breath again. The human studied their faces. They were unlike anyone he had ever seen. Yet there was something familiar about the way they clung to each other, the way their eyes held both fear and hope. He knew nothing about their story, Yet he felt connected to them as if fate itself had placed him here. The snowstorm that once seemed endless now felt like part of a larger path, one that had led him to this exact moment. The sisters, though weak, leaned against him, seeking warmth. They whispered softly in their own tongue, words he could not understand but whose meaning was clear. They were still alive. They were still together. And now they were not forgotten. The human looked out at the storm. He did not know what lay ahead, but he made a silent promise. Whatever the reason, whatever the cost, he would not leave them. The snow had hidden them, but destiny had revealed them. In this frozen world, a bond had begun. Fragile, uncertain, but powerful. A bond that would change not only their lives, but perhaps his own as well. The fire burned low, its light flickering softly against the walls of snow that surrounded them. The human had made a small shelter, shaping the drift into a place where the sisters could rest. He sat close by, watching them carefully, checking every small movement as if afraid they might fade again into silence. Their breaths came slow but steady now, their eyes half closed yet still aware of his presence. He had traveled through countless landscapes, but never had he felt such weight in a single moment. The sisters were unlike anything he had known, yet the way they clung to each other was something deeply familiar. He thought of his own people, of how survival always began with trust and how trust began with the smallest gestures of care. In their eyes he saw fear, but also a spark, faint but alive. That spark was enough for him. He offered them food again, breaking it into small pieces so their weak hands could manage. At first they did not move, their bodies too tired, their minds unsure. He smiled softly, showing them how to eat by taking a small bite himself. Slowly, one of the sisters reached forward. The taste was strange to her, but warmth spread through her as she swallowed. Encouraged, the others followed, their trembling fingers finding strength in the simple act of nourishment. For the human, it was a moment of relief. Each bite meant hope, and hope was stronger than the storm outside. As they rested, he studied them with quiet curiosity. Their faces glowed faintly in the firelight, their features delicate, their eyes reflecting colors he had never seen before. They were clearly not of his kind, yet their expressions told stories without words. He did not need to know their language to understand the bond they shared. One would glance at another, and with just that look they seemed to speak whole sentences. He could sense the way they protected each other, how they found courage simply by being close. Time passed slowly inside the shelter. The storm outside roared like a restless ocean, but within these walls of snow there was calm. The human adjusted the heater, made sure the fire stayed alive, and covered them with insulating fabric from his pack. His every action was careful, as though he feared that a sudden move might break the fragile peace. He did not ask for thanks, nor did he expect it. To him, this was simply the right thing to do. Life had value no matter where it came from. The sisters began to whisper among themselves. Their voices were soft, a language of flowing sounds the human did not recognize. Yet even without understanding, he felt the emotion behind the words. Gratitude, confusion, and something else, wonder. They looked at him not as an enemy, but as a puzzle, a figure who had appeared in the moment between life and silence. The youngest reached out her hand, small and trembling, and touched the fabric of his sleeve. He looked at her, surprised, but he did not move away. He simply nodded, a silent way of saying she was safe. The bond grew stronger with each passing hour. They began to mirror his actions, repeating simple movements he showed them. When he said water and pointed to the bottle, they repeated the sound, their voices uncertain but willing to learn. When he said fire and gestured toward the flames, they tried again. The human smiled. These small exchanges felt like bridges being built between two worlds. Still, questions filled his mind. Why were they here? Why had they been left beneath the snow? The thought troubled him, yet he pushed it aside for now. They were alive, and that was enough. The truth would reveal itself in time, but tonight all that mattered was their survival. The sisters, slowly gaining strength, began to sit up. Their eyes followed every move he made, as though studying him in return. To them, he was as strange as they were to him. His clothes, his tools, his way of making warmth in the cold, all of it was new. Yet what stood out most was the way he stayed close, never turning his back, never leaving them in silence. Trust grew where once there had been only fear. As the hours passed, the storm began to ease. The wind softened, and the night sky revealed faint stars through gaps in the clouds. The human stepped outside for a moment, scanning the horizon. The land stretched endlessly, quiet and white, as if nothing had ever lived there. Yet behind him, inside the small shelter, 3 lives rested. He felt the weight of responsibility press upon him. They needed more than warmth and food. They needed protection, guidance, and a reason to keep walking forward. When he returned inside, the sisters looked at him with something new in their eyes. It was not just gratitude, it was trust. They did not know his name, nor did he know theirs, but the bond had already been formed. It was unspoken yet undeniable. The snow had hidden them from the world, but it could not hide them forever. The human sat down near the fire, leaning back against the icy wall. His eyes closed for a moment, his body weary from travel, but even in his exhaustion he smiled faintly. The sisters, still weak, moved closer to the warmth. They leaned gently against each other, their breaths rising in quiet rhythm. The night carried on, but the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with life, with the fragile beginning of something greater. He did not yet know that their story was only just beginning. He did not know what trials awaited beyond the snowdrifts, or what choices he would have to make. But deep within, he sensed that this meeting was no accident. In this frozen wasteland, fate had brought them together, and together they would walk toward a future none of them could yet imagine. The fire had burned through the long night, its glow keeping the shadows away. When the morning light touched the frozen land outside, the sisters opened their eyes slowly. Their breaths were stronger now, no longer faint whispers, but steady streams of air. They turned to one another first, as they always did, and then their eyes settled on the human who sat nearby, still awake, still watching over them. His face looked tired, but his gaze was calm, filled with quiet determination. The sisters whispered among themselves in soft tones, their language flowing like gentle music. The human could not understand the words, but he could sense their meaning through the way their eyes shifted, the way their hands touched lightly as they spoke. They were unsure, curious, and still cautious. Yet none of their movements carried fear. Something had changed between them. He smiled gently, reaching into his pack to take out more food. He broke it into small pieces and placed them near them, speaking the words again. "Food," he said, pointing. They repeated after him, slowly, their voices uncertain but eager to learn. He nodded, showing approval. Then he lifted the water bottle. "Water," he said clearly. They looked at one another, and the eldest spoke the word back with quiet strength. The human's smile grew wider. Step by step, they were building a bridge between their worlds. The youngest sister leaned forward, pointing at the fire. Her eyes carried a question. The human understood. He lifted a small stick, touched it to the flame, and spoke. "Fire." She repeated it softly, then again, louder, her voice filled with pride. Her sister smiled at her, and for the first time since he had found them, a faint laugh rose in the cold shelter. It was soft, fragile, but it was laughter, and it filled the space with warmth stronger than the flames. Encouraged, the human tried more words, pointing at himself. "Human," he said, tapping his chest. The sisters tilted their heads, then looked at one another. They spoke softly in their tongue, then repeated after him. "Huh, man." Their voices shaped the sound carefully. It was not perfect, but it was close. He nodded again, patient and kind. Then he pointed to them, raising his eyebrows as if to ask for their names. The sisters looked at one another, hesitating. Finally, the eldest spoke a word, a name from their own world. It was soft and filled with meaning. He repeated it clumsily, and the sisters laughed again, this time without fear. As the hours passed, the shelter no longer felt like a place of survival alone. It became a place of connection. The human shared stories in his own language, knowing they would not understand the words but hoping they would feel the tone. His hands moved as he spoke, painting pictures in the air. He spoke of stars, of journeys, of the worlds he had seen. The sisters listened intently, their eyes wide, their minds trying to catch the images in his voice. They too began to share, speaking softly to one another, then gesturing so he might see glimpses of their story. Though the meanings remained hidden, the emotions were clear. The eldest sister touched the snow beside her and then placed her hand over her heart. The human watched carefully, understanding more through her gesture than her words. She was telling him of where they had come from, of how the cold had held them. The middle sister placed her hand on her sister's shoulder and then pointed to him, her eyes shining with something unspoken. He felt the weight of that look. She was saying that he had changed their fate. Later, when the day began to dim, the human stepped outside for a moment. The sky had softened, no longer filled with heavy clouds. He could see the pale sun above, casting silver light across the endless snow. It was quiet now, but he felt a strange tension in the air, as if the land itself was watching. He closed his eyes, taking in the silence. Behind him, the sisters huddled close together, their voices low and soft. He knew they were speaking of him, of whether to trust, of what to believe. And though he did not hear their words, he hoped their hearts were telling them the truth, that he had no wish to harm, only to help. When he returned inside, the youngest sister was waiting. She stood shakily, her body still weak but her spirit strong. She held out a small piece of fabric from her clothing, offering it to him. It was simple, torn at the edge, yet the meaning was clear. It was a gift, a symbol of trust. He accepted it with both hands, bowing his head slightly, and said softly, "Thank you." She did not understand the word, but she understood the feeling. That night, they rested again by the fire. The sisters leaned against each other, but this time they leaned a little closer to him too. The distance between them was fading, replaced by something unspoken but powerful. They did not know what the future held, but in that moment they were not alone. The snow outside was endless, the storm always waiting. But inside the small circle of light, hope lived quietly. The human closed his eyes, but before sleep claimed him, he glanced once more at the sisters. Their faces were calm, their breaths steady. He thought about how they had been hidden beneath the snow, forgotten by their own, and how fate had placed him there to uncover them. He felt no doubt anymore. This was not chance. This was purpose. The frozen land had brought them together, and together they would walk into whatever tomorrow might bring. The morning came softly, the pale light spreading across the frozen world like a quiet promise. Inside the shelter, the fire had burned low, but its warmth still lingered. The sisters stirred, their breath steady, their bodies stronger than before. The human watched them with calm eyes, his hands busy preparing the small heater again. Every sound seemed louder in the stillness. The crackle of the fire, the shifting of snow, the whisper of the wind outside. But there was something else in the air that day, something that unsettled the human. He could not explain it at first. It was a feeling, a weight pressing against his senses. He had traveled enough to know when silence carried meaning. The snow was too still, the wind too light. It was as though the land itself was holding its breath. The sisters seemed to feel it as well. Their voices grew softer, their glances sharper. The eldest looked often toward the entrance of the shelter, her eyes filled with unease. She whispered to her sisters in words the human could not understand, but he caught the rhythm of caution in her tone. He frowned and stepped outside for a moment, scanning the horizon. At first, he saw only snow stretching endlessly in every direction. Then faintly, he noticed shapes moving in the distance, shadows against the white shifting slowly but surely. His chest tightened. These were not animals. They walked with purpose. The figures grew clearer as the wind shifted, and he knew at once they were not strangers to the sisters. He returned to the shelter quickly. The sisters looked up at him, and when they saw the tension in his face, their own fear surfaced. The middle sister spoke softly to the others, her words hurried and full of meaning. They reached for one another's hands, holding tightly as though preparing for something long expected. The human did not need a translator to understand. Whoever was out there was looking for them. The storm had hidden them for a time, but the calm of morning had revealed their presence. Perhaps the tribe had discovered traces in the snow. Perhaps they had followed some ancient instinct, but now they were coming closer. The human looked at the sisters, then at the small shelter he had built. It was not enough. They needed a safer place. He motioned for them to follow, his hands moving quickly but gently. The sisters hesitated only a moment before trusting his lead. They gathered close, leaning on one another as they stepped carefully behind him. The human guided them through the snow, away from the drift, toward a hollow he had noticed earlier. A place where ice had formed an open cave, hidden behind heavy layers of frost. Inside, the air was colder, but it offered shadows, walls of ice and safety. The human settled them there, whispering words they did not understand but could feel through his calm tone. His hands moved to signal silence, to signal patience. The sisters nodded, their glowing eyes fixed on him, trusting that he knew what he was doing. The sound of the approaching figures grew clearer. Snow crunched beneath their steps, their voices faint but carried by the wind. The sisters lowered their heads, their bodies trembling. The youngest pressed against her elder sister's side, her eyes shut tight. The human crouched near the entrance, his body hidden, his breath slow. He could not hear their language clearly, but the rhythm of their voices told him enough. They were searching. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The figures moved closer, their shadows sliding across the snow outside the cave. The human's heart beat strong, but he kept still. He knew he could not let them be found. Whatever reason the sisters had been left beneath the snow, it was clear their return was not wanted. He did not know the full story, but he did not need to. He knew only one thing. They deserved to live. The eldest sister slowly lifted her head and looked at him. Her eyes glowed faintly in the icy light, filled with both fear and strength. She placed her hand over her chest, then extended it toward him. It was a silent gesture of trust, a way of saying that whatever happened, she believed in him. He returned the gesture with a small nod, his hand pressing against his chest as well. No words were needed. Outside, the shadows passed slowly, their voices fading as they moved across the frozen plain. The human stayed crouched, waiting, his body still as stone. The sisters hardly breathed, their hands locked together in quiet unity. Then at last the silence returned. The shadows were gone, at least for now. The human exhaled quietly, the sound no louder than the sigh of the wind. He turned to the sisters, his face calm but serious. They understood. This was not the end. Whoever had searched today might return tomorrow and the day after. Their bond had grown stronger, but so too had the danger. That night, as they sat together in the icy cave, the human shared the little warmth he could create. The sisters huddled close, whispering softly among themselves. Their voices carried a mix of fear and hope, and when their eyes met his, there was something more, a question. Could he truly protect them? Could he guide them to a place where the snow no longer threatened to take them back? The human did not answer aloud. Instead, he placed more fuel into the fire and adjusted the small heater, his actions speaking louder than words. He had made a silent promise the day he uncovered them, and that promise remained unbroken. Whatever shadows moved across the snow, whatever dangers lingered unseen, he would not leave them. The storm outside began to rise again, hiding the land in endless white. But inside the cave, 4 lives sat together, bound now by more than chance. The snow had tried to cover them, but it could not cover their hope. And as the firelight flickered across their faces, it was clear that hope was growing stronger than the storm. The storm had grown quiet by dawn. The winds no longer howled across the land, and the endless curtain of white seemed softer, calmer, as though the frozen world had paused to listen. Inside the cave, the small fire burned low, sending gentle light across the walls of ice. The human stirred the embers, careful to keep the warmth alive. Behind him, the 3 sisters sat close together, their faces touched by the glow. Their eyes were no longer filled with only fear. Something new had begun to rise there, something like strength. The human glanced toward the entrance of the cave. He had not forgotten the shadows that had moved across the snow the day before. Whoever had searched for the sisters would not give up easily. He felt the weight of it pressing upon him, yet he did not allow it to show. When he turned back to them, his face carried calm, his hands steady. They needed to see that he was not afraid. Courage, he knew, was something that could be shared without words. The eldest sister rose slowly to her feet. She was still weak, her steps unsteady, but her eyes held determination. She walked to the human and placed her hand on his shoulder, looking directly into his eyes. No language was needed. He understood. She was no longer willing to hide. The storm outside might return, their pursuers might draw near again, but she would not face it with only fear. She had found a reason to stand. The middle sister followed, taking her elder's hand, and then the youngest, her small fingers curling around both. Together they formed a circle with him. 4 figures in the dim light, bound by trust that had grown out of silence and survival. The human lowered his head slightly, moved by the quiet power of the moment. When he first uncovered them, they had been fragile, barely holding on. Now, though still weak, they were beginning to rise again, not only because of his care, but because of each other. They spent the day in the cave, sharing what little they had. The human showed them more words, simple ones, pointing at objects and repeating them with patience. The sisters tried, their voices soft but eager, repeating each sound until laughter filled the cave at their mistakes. They gave him words, too, names from their own tongue, sounds that carried meanings he could not fully know but felt in his heart. The gap between them was no longer as wide. Later, when the sun was fading, they heard distant movement once more. The human stepped toward the entrance, ready, but the eldest sister touched his arm gently. She shook her head as though to say, "Not only you, us too." He looked at her, surprised, and then at the others. Their faces showed no anger, no thought of harm, only quiet resolve. They had been cast aside once, left in silence, but now they refused to remain hidden. When the shadows returned near the cave, the sisters did not cower. Instead, they stood with him, their voices rising in soft unison, a chant in their own language. The sound was steady, carrying across the frozen air, echoing against the walls of ice. It was not loud, but it was strong enough to reach those outside. The human did not know the words, yet he felt their meaning. It was a song of belonging, of being alive, of choosing to stand together. The figures outside lingered for a while, perhaps unsettled by the unexpected sound, perhaps uncertain of what it meant. Then slowly the shadows retreated, their steps fading back into the endless snow. Silence returned once more, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of victory, gentle but sure. Inside the cave, the sisters turned toward the human, their eyes shining in the dim light. The youngest whispered a word she had learned, her voice trembling but filled with meaning. Hope. The others repeated it after her, their tones stronger each time. The human felt his chest tighten with emotion. That single word bridged their worlds more than any tool, more than any fire. They gathered once more around the small flame. The storm might return, the cold might rise again, but none of it mattered as much as it once had. They had faced the snow together, and together they had found something greater than survival. They had found trust. They had found unity. And in the soft glow of the fire, they had found the beginning of a future. The human looked at the three sisters and saw not weakness, not loss, but resilience. They were not defined by what they could not give to their people. They were defined by what they carried within them, the ability to endure, to trust, to hope. And in that moment he understood that their meeting was not chance. It was destiny, quiet and unspoken, hidden beneath the snow until the right time. As night settled once more, the human rested with them at his side. The frozen world outside stretched endlessly, but inside the cave warmth lived on. The sisters leaned against one another, and the youngest leaned lightly against him too. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since he had landed on this world, he felt at peace. The snow had tried to cover them, to keep their story buried, but it had failed. Together they had uncovered more than survival. They had uncovered hope, and hope would guide them into tomorrow.